My dear friend, stop everything you're doing and listen to this right now, because what I'm about to say carries weight, urgency, and fire. There are moments in life when a sentence slips out of your spirit before your circumstances are ready to receive it. Moments when your mouth announces a future your eyes cannot yet see. And when that happens, the world stares, the air shifts, and suddenly you feel exposed. But hear me, you were not exposing your weakness. You were exposing your destiny. My anointed ones, when you speak ahead of the blessing, you are not being reckless. You are being revealed. It is as if heaven cracked open for a second and your soul leaked out information your reality had not caught up to. Your words became a flare, shot into the darkness, signaling to heaven, I'm ready. People laughed because they were listening with natural ears to a supernatural frequency. They couldn't hear the internal clock God set inside you. They couldn't see the winds shifting around your spirit. They couldn't feel the tremor of divine alignment rumbling beneath your feet. You didn't speak too soon. Time just hadn't bowed to your calling yet. Your bold words were never a mistake. They were prophecy dressed as audacity, destiny disguised as courage. And heaven wrote every syllable down. Before we go any deeper into this revelation, I want to pause and honor you for being here. Your presence, your quiet support, your openness to God's voice, it all matters more than you know. If this message is already stirring something in your spirit, drop 777 inches the comments. Not as a trend, but as a sign of alignment, awakening, and readiness. Stay with me until the end. There's more heaven wants to say to you. Beloved chosen ones, what I'm about to say explains why your bold words carried more power than you realized. When you spoke early, before the blessing, before the breakthrough, before anything in your life reflected what was coming, you weren't boasting, you weren't guessing, you weren't reaching for something out of desperation. No, you were leaking information from a future your spirit had already stepped into. Your inner world shifted long before the outer world caught on. Something inside you evolved, awakened, expanded, and without meaning to your mouth, released classified spiritual intel, a glimpse of the version of you that heaven was in the process of unveiling. That's why your words sounded strange, even to you. That's why people looked at you sideways like you were dreaming too big or speaking too boldly. They weren't reacting to the words themselves, they were reacting to the timing. Because the truth is, they had not yet met the version of you those words belonged to. The version shaped in prayer, the version built in silence, the version strengthened by battles nobody else knew about. So when you spoke, they heard delusion, but heaven heard alignment. They saw exaggeration, but your spirit was simply speaking from a higher floor your life hadn't reached yet. And here's where it gets real. When those early words start unfolding right in front of them, the laughter dries up. The jokes stop mid-air. Their smirks turn into swallowed breaths. Because what they once dismissed as nonsense is now standing in front of them as undeniable evidence. Everything they mocked has turned into manifestation. Everything they doubted has become your testimony. And let me tell you why it bothers them so much. You dared to speak about something they hoped you would never touch. You dared to announce what they quietly prayed you'd never reach. You dared to declare a victory they didn't want you to walk into. Your words exposed their intentions as much as they exposed your destiny. And when the things you spoke began to happen, they didn't clap, they didn't celebrate, they didn't apologize. Instead, they went silent. They shifted, they pretended. Suddenly, they always believed in you. Suddenly, they knew you had it in you. But you and I both know that's not the truth. They weren't supporting you. They were studying you. They weren't encouraging you. They were underestimating you. They weren't clapping for your future, they were betting against it. But here's the beauty, their disbelief didn't delay your destiny. If anything, it made it more dramatic. Because now everything God whispered to your spirit is being confirmed publicly. Everything your soul knew ahead of time is being stamped with the seal of heaven. So today, as we move forward, I want to take you into the deeper revelation behind this phenomenon, because this isn't random, accidental, or coincidental. This is spiritual strategy. This is divine orchestration. Your early words weren't mistakes, they were markers. They were signs that you were already rising in the spirit before the world caught up. And now, step by step, I'm going to walk you through 14 powerful truths, 14 revelations that explain why speaking early is not arrogance, not foolishness, not delusion, but evidence of anointing, evidence of calling, evidence of elevation. Your spirit got there first. Your words followed. And now your life is racing to match what heaven already approved. Let's break it down. My dear friends, let me start by telling you this alignment never announces itself with trumpets. It does not walk into your life with applause, flashing lights, or grand declarations. No alignment comes quietly. It slips into your spirit like a gentle wind brushing against a locked door, like a whisper carried through the halls of your soul long before anything in your outer world has shifted. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss the moment heaven taps you on the shoulder and says, "Get ready. It's your time." I've lived long enough, prayed long enough, and listened long enough to know that every major breakthrough begins with a whisper. Before the blessing arrives, your spirit begins to move. Before the opportunity appears, your inner world begins to rearrange itself. You feel a pull, a shift, a knowing you didn't study for, didn't plan for, didn't ask for. And you can't explain it because nothing around you looks different yet. But inside, you feel the tremors of destiny waking up. Inside, you sense something rising that refuses to be ignored. Inside, you feel heaven tightening its grip on your path. That's alignment. And alignment always shows up in your heart before it shows up in your life. The problem is the world doesn't hear the whisper you hear. They don't feel the shift pressing against your ribcage. They don't sense the divine timing gathering itself like a storm about to break open over your future. They don't know what God has been stirring in the quiet corners of your soul. So when you speak, when you dare to give voice to what heaven whispered, they think you're early. They think you're delusional. They think you're stepping out of line. But the truth is, you're not early at all. You're on time with God. You're just ahead of them. See, people judge timing based on what they can see, but you've been responding to a frequency only your spirit can hear. The divine whispers are subtle. They're not loud. They're not forceful. They don't overpower your senses. They bypass them. They rise from within, carrying a weight your physical eyes cannot measure. And when you feel it, you know. You may not know how. You may not know when. You may not know what it will look like. But you know something is shifting. Something is aligning. Something is preparing to unfold. That knowing is not insanity. That knowing is not imagination. That knowing is God pulling your soul into the future He already wrote for you. You're not crazy, you're chosen. You're not confused, you're being calibrated. You're not ahead of schedule, you're ahead of their understanding. Because, hear me, the whisper of alignment always arrives before the evidence. You felt that pull before the door opened. You felt that shift before the job offer came. You sensed that transition before the relationship ended. You knew something greater was calling you before the first sign showed up. And that's why you spoke. That's why you declared. That's why words slipped out of your mouth that felt too heavy for your current season. It wasn't arrogance, it was alignment. You weren't predicting, you were responding. You weren't bragging, you were translating heaven's whisper into earthly language. But the thing about whispers is that not everybody hears them. Some people live so loud, so distracted, so unfocused, so spiritually deaf they couldn't hear God if He pressed His mouth against their heartbeat. So naturally, when you speak from a place they cannot perceive, they dismiss it. They call it too soon. They call it wishful thinking. They call it talking big. No, they just heard too slow. They weren't tuned in. They weren't aligned. And here's the part that stings sometimes. The people closest to you are the ones who hear the slowest. They know your history, but not your destiny. They know your past, but not your anointing. They know your struggles, but not your calling. So when you say, I feel something changing, they think you're exaggerating. When you say, my time is coming, they think you're dreaming. When you say, I know God is about to move, they think you're making it up. They don't realize your spirit has already stepped into a room your feet haven't entered yet. You're not walking by sight, you're walking by signal, by whisper, by alignment. And alignment, my friends, does not ask permission. It does not wait for applause. It does not require validation. It simply unfolds inside you first, then around you, then in front of you, until the quiet knowing becomes public reality. And the same people who doubted the whisper will eventually have to face the manifestation. When what you felt becomes what you live, when what you sensed becomes what you see, when the invisible becomes undeniable, every laugh, every doubt, every dismissal suddenly falls silent. Because alignment whispers, but manifestation roars. And when the roar comes, they will say, you got lucky. They will say it came out of nowhere. They will say God moved suddenly. But you will know the truth. It didn't begin when the door opened. It began when the whisper came. That was the moment heaven aligned with your spirit. That was the moment your destiny stepped into motion. That was the moment God marked you for your next level. So don't ignore the whisper. Don't doubt the tug. Don't apologize for sensing something others can't hear. You're not ahead of time. You're aligned with God. And alignment always whispers before it appears. Secondly, let me tell you a truth most people never learn in their lifetime. You were not predicting your future, you were remembering it. That quiet certainty you carried, that unshakable knowing that something was coming your way, was not blind faith. It was not reckless optimism. It was not your imagination running wild. No, it was a spiritual memory rising to the surface. There are moments when your spirit reaches further than your eyes, when the soul steps into a place the body has not yet walked, and it brings back fragments, impressions, echoes of who you are destined to become. And when those echoes surface, they don't feel like guesses. They feel like recognition, like déjà vu, like a truth you always knew but never had the words to explain. That's why you didn't tremble when you spoke. That's why the words felt familiar even when the circumstances didn't match. Your spirit had already visited the future God prepared for you. You were speaking from experience, not speculation. But try explaining that to people who only trust what they can touch. They are wired to believe it when they see it, while you are built to see it because you already believe it. Your faith isn't formed by evidence. Your evidence is formed by faith. You operate from a different sequence, a different rhythm, a different spiritual clock. See, you weren't trying to be deep when you spoke about where you were going. You were not trying to impress anyone. You were not trying to prophesy some dramatic destiny over your life. You were simply aligning your mouth with what your spirit had already witnessed. And that confuses people. It disturbs them. It unsettles them. Because they cannot comprehend how you can be so certain without proof. How you can speak confidently about a life that has not yet manifested. How you can carry assurance in seasons that feel unstable. But that's because they haven't met their future yet. You have. You encountered it in prayer. You felt it in your gut. You dreamed it in the secret chambers of your heart. You carried it like a memory, not a possibility. You weren't reaching forward, you were reaching backward, pulling toward you something that was already yours in the spirit. Let me give you an image. It's like walking through fog, knowing the path is already laid beneath your feet, even though you cannot see beyond 3 steps. Every time you speak, you're not mapping the trail, you're remembering it. You're not inventing the destination, you're returning to it. And people who don't understand this spiritual architecture will always misunderstand you. They call you unrealistic, but in truth, you're recalling reality. They call you irrational, but you're recalling what your spirit has already touched. They call you premature, but they don't realize your inner world has been living in this future long before your outer world caught up. Your declarations are not predictions. They are reminders. Reminders of a destiny God etched into the depths of your being before you ever took your first breath. When you spoke boldly about what was coming, you weren't conjuring a vision, you were confirming it. You weren't making a prophecy, you were aligning yourself with one that already exists. That's why it felt right, even when nothing around you looked right. Your soul was syncing with a divine blueprint that your circumstances hadn't yet reflected. If they only knew, if they could see what you've seen with the eyes of your spirit, if they could feel the quiet pull of destiny the way you have, they would understand that you were never gambling. You were remembering. And now that life is unfolding exactly in the direction you declared, the truth is undeniable. What they called lucky was actually alignment. What they called coincidence was actually confirmation. What they called overconfident was simply you walking in agreement with a path heaven revealed to you long ago. The future didn't surprise you because you had already met it. And when it arrived in physical form, it didn't feel new, it felt familiar. Like something you'd been waiting for. Like something you'd been carrying inside you. Like a promise that finally caught up with its appointed time. So the next time someone asks how you knew how you were so sure, how you dared to speak so boldly, don't shrink back. Don't downplay your certainty. Don't apologize for the clarity God gave you. Just smile, because you didn't predict the future. You remembered it. My dear friends, thirdly, you must understand something essential about human nature. Your confidence doesn't irritate people because it is loud. It irritates them because it exposes something quiet inside them, something broken, abandoned, or buried long ago. Your certainty shines a light into rooms they've kept locked for years. Your courage rattles the chains around dreams they once carried but later surrendered. And instead of facing that discomfort, they choose the easier response. They project, they judge, they laugh. But hear me, when they laugh, they aren't laughing at you. They're laughing at their own reflection. Your boldness reveals the fear they've been living with. Your movement highlights the stagnation they've accepted. Your willingness to speak about a future that hasn't formed yet forces them to confront the fact that they stopped believing in one for themselves. See, when you speak boldly, you awaken something in other people that they've tried to silence. You don't just speak to your destiny, you accidentally speak to the parts of them that never healed. And that stirs an ache, a discomfort, a restlessness. So they cover it with jokes, sarcasm, or doubt. But beneath all that noise is a truth too painful for them to articulate. They wish they had what you carry. They wish they had your courage to say out loud what their heart whispers in the dark. They wish they had your audacity to claim a future without waiting for evidence. They wish they had your fire, your conviction, your clarity. But instead of rising to your level, they respond from their wounds. This is why your confidence bothers them. It confronts everything they forfeited. Imagine this. Your words walk into the room like a mirror, and suddenly they see themselves, not as they are, but as they could have been. They see the version of themselves that once dreamed freely, spoke boldly, believed deeply. And when they realize they let that version die, the only defense they have left is to ridicule the version of you that survived. You say, I know where I'm going, and they hear, I know where I didn't go. You say, my time is coming, and they hear, my time passed. You say, I feel something bigger, and they hear, I settled for smaller. That's why they get defensive. Not because your words are threatening, but because your words are revealing. They aren't reacting to your future, they're reacting to their past. They aren't bothered by your path, they're bothered by their detours. So when they laugh at you, understand this, they are only mocking the courage they lost. They are only mocking the hope they abandoned. They are only mocking the dream they were too afraid to chase. Your confidence is a spotlight, and that spotlight doesn't only illuminate your destiny, it exposes their hesitation. It exposes every time they talk themselves out of something God whispered to them. It exposes the fear they baptized into realism, the insecurity they renamed wisdom, and the doubt they disguised as being practical. You did not offend them. You reminded them, and reminders hurt more than insults. But let me tell you something even deeper. Your confidence is not meant to be comfortable. It is meant to be prophetic. It carries weight. It shifts atmosphere. It breaks generational patterns. When you speak boldly, you interrupt spiritual stagnation first in yourself, then in the people around you. And anytime you disrupt a stagnant environment, resistance will rise. Your confidence carries movement. Their fear clings to stillness. The two cannot coexist peacefully. This is why some people pull away from you when you step into a new level of boldness. Not because they dislike you, but because they can no longer hide in your shadow. Your elevation removes their excuses. Your faith exposes their complacency. Your voice awakens their regret. But don't shrink because of their discomfort. Don't silence yourself to protect their insecurities. Don't dim your fire to keep others warm in their stagnation. You were not called to comfort their fear. You were called to confront your future. And hear me, the fact that your confidence stirs something in them is proof that your voice carries power. God doesn't anoint silence, He anoints sound. And the sound coming out of you is shaking atmospheres, agitating spirits, and awakening destinies. Yes, they may laugh now, but laughter is not truth, it is armor. It is easier for them to mock than to admit they lost courage. It is easier to call you unrealistic than to confess they gave up. It is easier to doubt your bold words than face their buried dreams. But their laughter does not define your calling. Their discomfort does not determine your destiny. And their fear does not limit your future. Because eventually, mark this, they will see what you saw. They will witness the unfolding of every bold declaration you made, every dream you resurrected, every prayer you whispered in faith. And on that day, the very confidence they mocked will become the evidence they cannot deny. Your confidence is not arrogance. Your confidence is alignment. Your confidence is obedience. Your confidence is the echo of a future God already wrote for you. So let them react however they need to. Let them whisper. Let them doubt. Let them misunderstand. Their response is not your responsibility. Their feelings are not your burden. Their fear is not your assignment. Walk in your confidence. Speak with your chest. Declare with your spirit. Move with conviction. Because your confidence isn't the problem. Their fear is. Fourthly, chosen ones understand this with absolute clarity. Your words were never offensive because they were loud or dramatic. They unsettled people because they reached beyond the limits of what they themselves believed was possible. You were not trying to shock anyone, nor were you trying to appear elevated or superior. You were not performing confidence, exaggerating your destiny, or presenting a future that was not rooted in truth. Your language simply carried a reach that extended farther than the stretch of their imagination. When someone has spent their entire life thinking inside a cage, hearing the voice of someone who has already stepped outside of that cage feels uncomfortable, even threatening. And because they do not recognize freedom, they label it delusion. You spoke from a place that was higher than where they were standing. You spoke from a mountaintop perspective while they were still learning how to climb. You spoke from a future that had already unfolded in your spirit, a future they had never even dared to imagine. You spoke from a path that your inner being had walked long before there was any visible evidence. And because they could not picture the world you were describing, they assumed that such a world could not exist at all. Their inability to envision your destiny had nothing to do with the truth of what God placed inside you. It had everything to do with the ceilings they placed over themselves. They assessed your potential through the narrow window of their own limitations, not through the breadth of what heaven had assigned to you. When you said you were rising higher, what they actually heard was a confession of their own doubt. When you said something great was coming, they heard the quiet echo of the greatness they themselves stopped believing in long ago. When you spoke of stepping into a new season, they heard their own fear of stepping anywhere at all. They were not truly interrogating your words, they were wrestling with their own limits. People like this do not see your wings, they only see the walls they built around themselves. They do not hear your calling, they only hear the echoes of unopened doors in their own life. And because their imagination is small, they assume your future must be small as well. Vision does not shrink in order to fit into someone else's comfort zone. Destiny does not dim itself just to match the level of someone else's doubt. Calling does not negotiate with the limitations of another person's thinking. When you spoke, you were not trying to challenge them or provoke them. Your words simply revealed how confined their thinking had become. Your vision stretched like a horizon with no visible end. Theirs was boxed in like a window that refused to open. And instead of allowing your vision to expand their imagination, they attempted to shrink yours to fit inside the narrow confines of their worldview. That is why they accused you of dreaming too big. That is why they labeled your faith unrealistic. That is why they insisted you were reaching beyond your place. They could not see beyond the boundaries they had drawn around their own potential, and so they assumed that you should remain restricted by those same boundaries. They misunderstood possibility because they spent too many years living inside probability, inside the predictable, inside what felt safe and familiar. But here is the revelation they never expected: your words began to manifest. And as they manifested, something powerful began to unfold around them and within them. Suddenly they were forced to confront the truth that the limits they lived under were limits they built themselves. The life they proclaimed impossible was becoming the life you were actually living. The future they dismissed as fantasy was now unfolding as your daily reality. The season they mocked was now the season you had stepped into with unapologetic boldness. And that is when silence fell. Not because they finally understood you, not because they suddenly became open-minded, but because your breakthrough exposed the smallness of their imagination. When your words came to pass, when your progress became undeniable, when your destiny began to take shape, it forced them into a confrontation with their own avoidance. They had to confront the fact that they were surviving while you were envisioning. They were playing safe while you were stepping out. They were clinging to limits while you were following the vision placed inside you. Your life became the mirror they never wanted to look into. In that reflection, they could see the opportunities they let slip away, the dreams they abandoned prematurely, the courage they never activated. You did not shame them, reality did that. Manifestation did that. The fruit of your obedience did that. What you lived became the truth they could no longer dismiss. The truth is, people only call something impossible when they themselves cannot imagine it. They mistake their personal limitations for universal laws. They take the boundaries of their own faith and project them onto your future. They assume that because they cannot reach something, no one else can either. But vision is not democratic. Destiny is not determined by the approval or the consensus of others. And calling does not pause simply because someone else feels threatened or uncomfortable. Your words were never the issue. The issue was that their imagination was too small to hold the weight of what you were speaking. They tried to shrink-wrap your destiny into the narrow frame of their understanding. And when your destiny did not fit into that frame, they concluded that you were too much. But your too much was simply more than their not enough. Your vision was wider than their worldview. Your dreams were longer, higher, and deeper than their reach had ever been. And when your words began to come true, when manifestation began speaking louder than their doubt, they were finally forced into a truth that they could no longer escape. You were living proof that it had never been the world holding them back. It had been their imagination. You were the evidence that possibility does not need permission. You were the reminder that God never dreams in small sizes. You were the disruption to the narrative they used to justify stagnation. Your life testified to a truth they avoided for years. You were living by vision while they were living by limits. And no matter how hard they tried to minimize you, your destiny refused to shrink. Your words did not expose you, they exposed them. So never apologize for having a vision that intimidates limited minds. Never apologize for dreaming in dimensions others never learned how to think in. Never apologize for speaking boldly about places your spirit has already walked. Your vision is not too big. Their imagination is simply too small. Next, you must understand that people didn't doubt you because your future was impossible. They doubted you because the evidence of your growth was not yet visible to them. They formed opinions about you based on the outdated version of who you were, the version they kept frozen in their memory, not the evolving and expanding version God was shaping within you. They assessed you through the lens of your past, your shortcomings, your early missteps, and the seasons when you were only just learning how to stand on your own feet. And because their perception was limited to what they had seen before, they concluded that what you had been was all you could ever become. They did not realize how limited their viewpoint truly was. They didn't recognize that while they were busy observing the surface of your life, God was working tirelessly on the foundation beneath it. They didn't realize that while they kept replaying your mistakes, heaven was actively rewriting your destiny. They didn't realize that while they were stuck rereading your old chapters, you were already drafting an entirely new story that belonged to a different season of your life. This has always been one of the enduring tragedies of human perception. People trust what they can see and question what they cannot. They presume that growth must be loud, public, noticeable, something that announces itself with fanfare. But the most profound transformations happen quietly, deep beneath the surface, hidden away from applause, away from recognition, and away from any crowd that might witness it. Just as a seed must break apart in darkness long before it rises toward the light, your spirit was stretching, strengthening, and expanding in hidden places. While the world assumed nothing meaningful was taking place, they did not see the nights when you lay awake wrestling with God, pouring your questions and fears into the silence. They did not see the mornings when you forced yourself to rise with a determination not to repeat the same patterns as the day before. They did not see the discipline being cultivated in you during quiet hours while no one was watching. They did not see the tears, the whispered prayers, the sacrifices, and the private decisions that slowly sculpted you into someone new. They didn't witness the inner construction zone that God had opened within you, the scaffolding rising around old wounds, the restructuring of your thought patterns, the demolition of habits that once defined you, the rebuilding of your identity layer by layer. So when you finally spoke with boldness, when you began declaring something greater, when you dared to articulate the future God had shown you, they assumed you were speaking from fantasy. But you weren't speaking from imagination, you were speaking from formation, from a place of truth built through struggle, obedience, surrender, and unseen progress. To them, your words seemed disconnected from your present reality only because they did not understand how long you had been preparing internally. They didn't understand that the foundation for your next season had been poured long before they ever noticed movement. They didn't understand that the soil beneath your feet had been strengthened through relentless pressure, through pain you endured in silence, through perseverance that reshaped your character when nobody applauded. You didn't become strong overnight, you became strong out of sight in places that only God could see. People often confuse visibility with truth. They think that if they cannot see your progress, it must not be happening. They think that if your life does not visibly reflect the words you speak, then you must be deceiving yourself. They interpret your silence as stagnation, failing to understand that silence is where God does some of his deepest and most intentional work. A tree never apologizes for having roots that remain unseen, and in the same way, you have no reason to apologize for the growth that occurred out of you. Your unseen seasons are not invalid simply because others did not witness them. When you spoke about rising higher, they couldn't grasp that you had already risen internally long before outward results appeared. When you spoke about breakthrough, they didn't realize that your spirit had already endured the breaking. When you spoke about stepping into purpose, they were unaware that obedience had been shaping your steps far earlier than any evidence appeared on the outside. Their confusion was not a reflection of your authenticity, it was a reflection of their limited awareness. They called you delusional because they didn't know what you had survived to stand where you are. They called you unrealistic because they didn't know what you had surrendered to God in private moments. They called you foolish because they didn't hear the quiet, steady whispers God spoke to you in your stillness. They judged the shell without ever considering the transformation happening within it. They judged the seed without understanding the tree it was destined to become. They underestimated you simply because they expected to see outward proof before acknowledging inward progress. But God does his greatest work in hidden places. God develops his chosen ones in silence. God shapes greatness in solitude. And here is the profound irony: the very people who doubted your inner growth will one day be astonished by your outer results. They will witness the fruit of your journey and assume it appeared suddenly, unaware of the years of roots growing beneath the surface. They will see success and believe it came out of nowhere, unaware that it came out of obedience, discipline, and surrender. They will see glory and forget entirely that there was once a struggle. They will see the visible outcome but remain blind to the invisible preparation. But you will know You will remember every brick you laid in silence. You will remember every internal battle you fought alone. You will remember every moment when you chose humility over reaction, every moment when you bowed your head and allowed God to keep working inside you. So do not be angry with people for failing to believe in you. They simply did not have the ability to see the version of you that God was revealing. They saw the old you, the one who did not yet have wings. They had no idea that your cocoon season was ending. They didn't understand that the quiet surrounding you was not laziness or mediocrity, it was metamorphosis. You were not pretending to be someone new, you were revealing who you had already become. Your words did not come from arrogance, they came from alignment. They came from the quiet confidence of someone who has been rebuilt from the inside out. You built the foundation for your future in those unseen seasons. And now the structure is rising where everyone can finally witness it. The world is only now catching up to what God completed long ago. And when people look at your life and ask, when did all this happen? You will smile because you know the truth. It happened long before they noticed, long before they believed, long before they ever paid attention. They didn't see your growth because God wasn't growing you for their approval. He was growing you for purpose, for assignment, for destiny. And destiny does not require an audience to begin. Destiny requires only obedience. Sixthly, my dear friends, you need to understand that what came out of your mouth was never an act of showing off. It was the sound of an inner breaking, the sound of a person stepping out of a confined version of themselves. The moment growth begins from within, it announces itself long before the world can see it, and the first evidence of that spiritual shift is usually found in the way you start speaking. Your tone shifts before your surroundings shift. Your language rises before your circumstances can rise with it. To someone who only knows who you used to be, that emerging voice looks like unnecessary confidence, but in truth it is the natural expression of a person who has already outgrown the cage that once held them comfortably. You were not trying to impress people or elevate yourself in their eyes. You were feeling the pressure of a spirit no longer willing to sit quietly inside a container too small to hold it. The words you spoke were not arrogance. They were the first cracks in the shell of your former identity. Think of how nature transforms its creatures. A snake sheds because its skin can no longer stretch far enough. A butterfly breaks free of its cocoon because its wings are ready to unfold. None of these moments are about pride. They are simply the evidence of growth that can no longer stay hidden. Your words, in the same way, were signs of emergence. They were the responses of a version of you rising into place even before anyone else knew that transformation had begun. People around you misunderstood this, not because you were wrong, but because they lacked access to the battles and breakthroughs that shaped your new voice. They could not see the quiet nights of reflection, the inner wrestling, the decisions you made to step away from a smaller identity. All they saw was a person speaking from a height they did not recognize. Without understanding the process behind that elevation, they assumed you were exaggerating your importance when in reality, you were simply acknowledging your evolution. Human beings often hold on tightly to the version of you they first met. They become attached to the former you because it fits their understanding and supports their expectations. But as soon as your spirit rises beyond that familiar image, your words begin to reflect a new internal landscape, and that disruption threatens the comfort they associate with who you used to be. You may not have intended to challenge their assumptions, yet every bold statement you made worked like a mirror, reflecting how outdated their understanding had become. They called it doing too much, but the truth is they were referencing an expired version of you. Your spirit had graduated to another level while they were still trying to keep you in the classroom of yesterday. They compared your new language to old information because they had not followed you into the spaces of quiet transformation that shaped your voice. When you spoke, you were not announcing achievement, you were announcing departure from the limitations that once defined you. You were not inflating yourself, you were stepping away from the identities that no longer matched your calling. Those statements were not aimed at lifting you above someone else. They were aimed at acknowledging the height your spirit had already reached. The change in your speech reflected the fact that you could no longer pretend to fit into labels that once restricted your growth. You were not stepping out of line. You were stepping out of an old life. People reacted because they did not witness your internal renovation. They did not see the walls of insecurity being broken, the mindset shifts being built brick by brick, the slow transformation that took place in silence. They did not see you discard the beliefs that once held you down. They did not see the renewal process that reshaped the way you viewed yourself. So, when your voice rose, it seemed sudden to them, even though it was the result of a long, quiet rebuilding. They were startled because you no longer fit the script. They kept turning back to the one that had already become too small for your soul. And instead of updating their understanding, they concluded that you were exaggerating. They called it boasting, unaware that you were breathing for the first time. Every word you released was a declaration that the old version of you had expired. Those words carried the tone of a person who refused to shrink again. They carried the energy of someone who refused to return to patterns that once limited them. They carried the pulse of someone ready to walk in a form they should have always been allowed to express. You were not trying to step over anyone. You were stepping out of a shell that had already cracked from the pressure of your growth. People become uneasy when someone they know begins to rise, not because the rising is wrong, but because the rising exposes the fact that they have remained in place. They may not resent you as a person, but they resent the change that reminds them of their own lack of movement. Your transformation disrupts their equilibrium, and rather than confront their own stagnation, they focus on the boldness of your voice. They call your confidence unnecessary because acknowledging its legitimacy would require acknowledging the possibility that they too were meant to rise, but chose not to. Your supposed bragging was never rooted in ego. It was rooted in emergence. Your growth outpaced their expectations, and instead of expanding their understanding, they tried to reduce your identity to something they felt comfortable with. You were never trying to take up more space. You were learning to take the space that belonged to you all along. The boldness in your words was the natural expression of a calling that refused to stay small. There will always be people who misinterpret your rising as arrogance because they do not have a reference point for your transformation. They only know the cocoon. They never imagined the butterfly. They only knew the skin you shed. They never imagined the size of your new form. They only knew the voice of your past. They never imagined the clarity of your future, but their misunderstanding does not cancel your emergence. Their unfamiliarity does not invalidate your evolution. Your voice was not an announcement of pride. It was the sound of a life expanding beyond its former limits. The sound of someone stepping into the identity that God had been shaping inside them long before the world took notice. And if people cannot understand that, let them stay in yesterday while you walk into tomorrow. Beloved chosen ones, next you must realize that every time you spoke about the future, every time you opened your mouth and declared a direction that your life had not yet visibly taken, you were not simply expressing hope. You were not merely sharing optimism. You were stepping into a test designed to measure the strength of your belief. Speaking early is never just speech. It is a trial, a proving ground, a moment where heaven leans in to see whether the conviction inside you is strong enough to withstand the silence around you. Each declaration became a question to your own soul. Do you trust what you know even when you cannot yet see it? Do you hold on to what God whispered to you when the world around you offers no confirmation? Do you dare to align with what has not manifested, knowing well that alignment often arrives long before evidence? When you spoke boldly, you unknowingly entered a space of spiritual examination. Your faith was being inspected not by people, but by the very future you named. The words leaving your mouth carried the weight of a challenge. Would you remain steadfast when doubt stared you in the face? Would you stand firm when people dismissed your confidence? Would you keep believing when no proof appeared? When doubt stared dead, progress seemed painfully slow. When life looked unchanged, every bold statement became a mirror, revealing the resilience of your inner posture. You were not just talking, you were demonstrating. Your declarations were not casual, they were commitments. And though you did not realize it at the time, each word you released was sowing a seed that required patience, loyalty, and endurance to bring forth its harvest. The truth is that life often tests belief before blessing. It measures conviction before manifestation. Your early declarations served as markers of how closely your spirit was aligned with the future God designed for you. Each time you spoke, heaven watched to see if you would shrink back after speaking, or if you would stand with the courage required to walk the journey your words initiated. Speaking the future is easy when conditions are favorable, when the path is visible, when applause surrounds you. But to speak confidently when nothing around you reflects your declaration, that is the test of a soul learning to trust God more than circumstances. And you passed that test. Even if you did not feel strong at the time, your consistency proved it. You didn't retract your words just because people doubted. You didn't apologize for believing in something bigger than what your life currently displayed. You didn't silence yourself simply because others could not see what you saw. You held on to the truth inside you with a quiet resolve that many underestimated. They mistook your silence for uncertainty, but your silence was discipline. They mistook your stillness for weakness, but your stillness was preparation. They mistook your patience for hesitation, but your patience was proof that you trusted the timing of the one who planted the vision in your heart. Every test arrives disguised as delay. Every proving ground arrives as resistance. And every word you spoke became an invitation for the invisible world to pressure you just enough to reveal whether your belief was anchored or fragile. Some days you felt the tremors of doubt. Some days you wondered whether you had spoken too soon. Some days you worried that your declarations would embarrass you if nothing changed. But even those moments were part of the test. The question was not whether you could speak with confidence once. The question was whether you could continue believing long after the echo of your own voice faded. The test was whether you would bend under the weight of external disbelief or stand firm under the weight of internal conviction. And you proved yourself steady. Your heart stayed aligned with the truth you felt. Your spirit refused to retreat. You may not have announced it out loud, but within you there was a fire that would not go out, a fire that insisted that God does not give visions without purpose. You trusted what was inside you, even when nothing outside you validated it. That is how you passed the test. Many people think blessing arrives without process, but true elevation arrives only after belief has been strengthened through trial. Your early words were the first step into that trial. They summoned pressure, scrutiny, misunderstanding, and silence, but they also summoned growth. They summoned clarity. They summoned the resilience needed to hold the weight of the future you were calling in. Without the test, the blessing would not have found a vessel strong enough to hold it. Without the test, your character would not have expanded to match the magnitude of what God was preparing to release. Without the test, you would not have become the person capable of stewarding the destiny you declared. So understand this: your words were not premature, they were powerful. They did not expose you, they revealed you. They did not embarrass you, they established you. They were not signs of desperation, they were signs of obedience. You spoke early because your spirit recognized the future before your circumstances did. And every time you opened your mouth, you invited your soul into deeper alignment with that calling. The test was not meant to break you, but to build your foundation so that when manifestation arrived, you would not crumble under its weight. Now that time has passed and your life has begun to shift in the direction of your words, it is clear that the test has served its purpose. You survived the pressure. You endured the silence. You held your ground when others doubted. And today you stand as proof that faith spoken early becomes destiny fulfilled in time. The test was never about whether God was capable. It was about whether you were ready. And through every declaration, you showed that you were. Eighthly, you need to understand that the negative reactions people had toward your early words were never rooted in logic. They were rooted in fear. Not fear of you failing, but fear of you succeeding. Because the moment you began to change, the moment you started speaking from a deeper place, a higher place, a freer place, something shifted in the dynamic they once relied on. You were no longer predictable. You were no longer confined. You were no longer controllable in the ways you once were. And that loss of control stirred something unsettling inside them. People become comfortable when they think they understand you. They build their expectations around the version of you they have memorized, and once those expectations settle in, they rely on the idea that you will always act, think, speak, and dream within those familiar boundaries. But when your spirit begins to rise, when you break out of that familiar pattern, when you start talking like someone who knows they are meant for more, the foundation of their old assumptions begins to crack. They don't know how to categorize the new you. They don't know where to place your newfound confidence. And rather than adjust to your growth, they react with resistance. Your change confronted their comfort. Your evolution disrupted the image they had of you. And do not underestimate how threatening that can feel to someone who has benefited consciously or unconsciously from your old limitations. When you shift, their sense of control slips. When your voice strengthens, their grip weakens. When you step into purpose, the roles they built around your smallness collapse. That fear of losing control is what fueled their negativity. They did not attack your words because your words were unreasonable. They attacked them because your words meant you were becoming someone they could no longer influence or predict. They were not reacting to the content of what you said. They were reacting to the consequences of your transformation. And here is a deeper truth: they were never afraid of you being wrong. They were terrified of you being right. Because if you were right about where you were headed, if you were right about the future that was pulling you forward, then everything they dismissed, minimized, or mocked would be exposed. If your early declarations proved true, then their skepticism would be revealed for what it really was, a reflection of their own limitations. People do not fear your failure. Failure keeps you familiar. Failure keeps you small. Failure keeps you in roles that help them feel secure. But success, authentic success, shakes their world. Success forces them to confront their own stagnation. Success highlights the fact that they stayed in place while you dared to move. And the potential of your success is what created that undercurrent of anxiety in their reactions. Even before anything had manifested, even before your words had taken shape, something in them feared that your confidence might actually be justified. Your self-belief acted like a spotlight. It illuminated the corners of their lives they preferred to keep dim. When you spoke boldly, they felt exposed, not because of what you said, but because of what your voice revealed about their own unwillingness to evolve. You were stepping out of the mold they stayed inside of. And that shift forced them to face a truth they wanted to avoid. If you could rise, they could have risen too. But they chose not to. Their world depends on predictability. Yours depends on purpose. Those two forces were never going to coexist peacefully. Your transformation threatened to rewrite the narrative they had grown comfortable with. They had grown accustomed to a version of you who doubted, hesitated, or questioned themselves. But the moment you spoke with clarity and conviction, you disrupted the dynamic. The moment you stepped into your truth, you shook loose the expectations built around your former self. Your rising disrupted their balance. Your courage destabilized their complacency, and your declarations shattered the illusion that they understood your story better than you did. That loss of imagined control can stir frustration, denial, and in some cases, hostility. Understand, this control is a silent addiction. People cling to familiarity because it gives them the illusion of safety. When you change, it forces them to confront their own fears of growth. When you break out, it forces them to examine the walls they have chosen to stay within. When you rise, it forces them to admit that the life they settled for is not the only life available. Your evolution demands that they evolve too, and not everyone is willing to rise with you. So instead of facing the invitation, your growth presents many retreat into negativity. They criticize to protect their comfort. They doubt to defend their stagnation. They resist because resistance feels easier than reflection. But even through their reactions, one truth remains constant. They were never afraid of your voice. They were afraid of your victory. They were never threatened by your declarations. They were threatened by the possibility that your declarations might come true. because your success would prove that what they told themselves was impossible was in fact always within reach. Your confidence was a reminder that destiny cannot be controlled by those who fear it. Your boldness signaled that the old dynamic was dissolving, and your transformation taught them that the version of you they were comfortable with was no longer in charge. So let their reactions be what they are. Their fear is not your responsibility. Their need for control is not your burden. Their discomfort is not your assignment. You were not called to remain manageable. You were called to be undeniable. And undeniable you shall become. Next, chosen ones, you spoke early because something deep within you had already made a decision long before your circumstances reflected it. There comes a point in every person's journey where the soul reaches a threshold and quietly declares with a conviction that cannot be reversed that it will no longer live small. That inner declaration is rarely loud, rarely dramatic, and rarely seen by anyone else, but it is powerful enough to change the direction of your entire life. Before a single word ever left your mouth, your soul had already stepped into a new dimension of identity. And your words, the ones people said were premature or too bold or disconnected from reality, were nothing more than signals rising from that internal shift. They were the first signs that your old self had reached its limit, and the new self was pushing upward, demanding expression, refusing to stay hidden any longer. This is why you spoke the way you did. You did not speak from arrogance. You spoke from awakening. Something within you had risen from a long sleep and refused to shrink back down to the size others were comfortable seeing you as. It was not that you suddenly became a different person overnight. It was that you finally stopped denying the truth of who you already were. The moment your soul decided that smallness was no longer acceptable, your voice naturally followed. You began saying things that reflected a bigger identity, a stronger future, and a deeper understanding of your own worth. And because others had not witnessed the internal transformation that brought you to that point, your words sounded strange to them. They could not understand why you suddenly carried yourself with the energy of someone who expected more. But you understood. Your soul had already crossed a line that your life was still trying to catch up to. Many people spend their entire lives waiting for permission to live fully. They wait for validation, applause, reassurance, and the approval of the world around them. But when your soul reaches that moment of awakening, you stop waiting. You stop shrinking. You stop negotiating with yourself about what you deserve. That internal decision often arrives quietly like a whisper, but it carries the weight of destiny. It says that you will no longer settle for less than what God intended for you. It says that you will no longer hide your gifts, silence your voice, or bury your purpose just to make others comfortable. It says that your spirit has remembered its value, and now the rest of your life must rise to meet that recognition. Your words became the echo of that decision. They were evidence that your spirit was stepping into a larger frame, expanding beyond the limitations of who you used to be. And even though the people around you may not have understood that expansion, even though they may have thought you were trying to impress someone or pretend to be bigger than you were, the truth is much simpler. You were speaking from the new self that had already begun to form within you. You were not trying to convince anyone. You were revealing the reality of your transformation. The reason your early declarations made people uncomfortable is because they were still interacting with the older version of you. They were speaking to the you who once doubted, hesitated, second-guessed, and played it safe. But that version of you no longer existed. Your new self had already begun stepping forward. Your soul had already elevated, and when the soul rises, the mouth cannot help but follow. Your words told the truth about where you were heading even before your environment did. They were not delusions. They were reflections of the life your spirit had already accepted. There is something incredibly powerful about a person who finally recognizes their own worth. It does not require applause. It does not require proof. It does not require agreement from anyone else. Once the soul decides, everything else must align. That decision becomes the foundation of bold speech, courageous choices, and the ability to stand firm, even when no evidence exists yet. When others heard your voice, they were hearing destiny speak before reality formed. They were hearing confidence shaped by inner clarity, not outer validation. They were hearing the sound of someone who had stopped waiting for proof and started walking in purpose. Your early words were the first signs of emergence. They were not random. They were not accidental. They were the natural overflow of a soul that had awakened to its rightful identity. And because that identity was larger than anything your past had ever suggested, the people who knew you only through old experiences struggled to understand what you were saying. They thought you were exaggerating. They thought you were reaching. They thought you were stretching yourself beyond what made sense. But you were not stretching. You were expanding into the space that had always been meant for you. When your soul declared it would not live small anymore, your entire life began recalibrating itself around that truth. Your voice became bolder. Your thoughts became clearer. Your expectations became higher. And even though none of this was visible to the outside world, yet it was real, it was happening. It was reshaping your identity. And your words simply revealed the shift long before anyone else could see it. Speaking early was not a mistake. It was alignment. It was evidence that your soul had already stepped forward into the territory your feet would soon walk. What people often misunderstand is that emergence always shows up in language before it shows up in life. The soul speaks its future first. And when the soul speaks, the mouth must echo it. Your words were the announcement of a new chapter that had already begun internally. You spoke from truth that others had not yet witnessed. You spoke from growth that others had not yet recognized. You spoke from identity that others had not yet accepted. But the fact that others could not see it did not make your words any less true. It only revealed how far ahead your spirit had moved. So when you declared what was coming, you were not trying to act above your station. You were honoring the decision your soul had already made that you would no longer limit yourself to the confines of who you used to be. You spoke early because your spirit had already taken the lead. You spoke confidently because your identity had already expanded. You spoke boldly because your worth had already been established in places no one else could see. Your soul said, "I will not live small anymore." And your voice became the evidence. Tenthly, you must recognize that your progress did more than elevate you. It exposed them. It showed clearly how deeply they underestimated you. They never thought you would reach the places you are now approaching because they were looking at you through the lens of your past. They examined you through old memories, old mistakes, old versions, old seasons. They assumed that who you were then was all you could ever be. Their judgment was frozen in time, stuck in a chapter you had already outgrown. And because their perception was anchored to your history, they could not fathom a future where you rose above it. Their disbelief had very little to do with your ability and everything to do with the limitations of their own imagination. People often get comfortable placing you inside a box that fits their expectations. They build opinions around who you used to be, not realizing that growth occurs in silence. They don't see the nights you spent fighting internal battles. They don't see the discipline you built behind closed doors. They don't see the choices that reshaped your character or the sacrifices that strengthened your resolve. To them, your progress looks sudden, but to you it has been slowly forming through countless unseen moments. When they underestimated you, they were not judging your potential, they were judging their outdated understanding of you. And now that your life has started rising beyond those limits, they are forced to face a truth they never expected. They were wrong. There is a certain discomfort people feel when someone they once dismissed begins to grow. It rattles something deep within them. Your rise becomes a mirror, revealing how inaccurately they viewed you. Your progress demands that they confront the gap between who you actually are and who they assumed you would always remain. They cannot deny your growth because it is no longer internal. It is visible, measurable, and undeniable. And with every new step you take, each accomplishment, each breakthrough, each quiet victory, their misjudgment becomes more difficult to hide behind excuses. They see your progress unfolding, and whether they admit it or not, they feel the sting of realizing that their assessment of you was incomplete. Your success, even in its early stages, becomes evidence that their perspective was built on shallow observation rather than true understanding. They didn't see your hunger. They didn't see your resilience. They didn't see your willingness to evolve. They judged the shell, not the seed. And when the seed becomes a tree, the judgment collapses under its own inaccuracy. What they thought was your ceiling was merely the floor of your next season. And now they are witnessing the truth in real time. You were never limited by their opinion. You were limited only by the time it took for your growth to surface. Your progress exposes them because it reveals a pattern common in human relationships. Many people only see the version of you that existed when they met you. They fail to update their perception as you grow, so they cling to an outdated portrait. But destiny is not static. Calling is not static. Growth is not static. While they remained still in their interpretation, you were moving, evolving, stretching, learning, and rising. And when a person grows beyond a perspective that refuses to shift, conflict arises in the mind of the observer. They begin questioning not just who you are now, but how wrong they were, and assuming they knew you so completely. Your rise forces them to reflect on their own limitations. They wonder why they couldn't see your potential. They wonder why they underestimated you. They wonder how they misread your determination. They wonder how they missed the signs of your capability. And the truth is simple: they weren't looking for growth. They were looking for confirmation of their own assumptions. They expected your life to match the narrative they created for you, so when your reality deviated from their expectations, they felt threatened, confused, and unprepared to adjust their perspective. Your progress pushed them into a corner where they had to confront their own misjudgment. Some try to deny it. Some try to rewrite history. Some suddenly pretend that they always believed in you. But you remember the doubt. You remember the looks. You remember the quiet dismissal and the subtle silence. You remember how alone you felt when you spoke boldly, and they had nothing but skepticism to offer in return. And now their shift in tone is not a reflection of their changed belief. It is a reflection of your undeniable progress. You see, progress carries a power that words alone cannot match. Progress is a rebuttal that requires no speech. Progress is a correction that needs no confrontation. Progress is a declaration that the judgments placed upon you were inaccurate. When you grow, when you rise, when you step into the future you once declared, you silence every doubt, not by arguing, but by becoming. The transformation of your life becomes the evidence that exposes how deeply they underestimated you. And your elevation becomes the lesson they never intended to learn. Nothing is more humbling to someone who doubted your potential than watching you thrive. Nothing is more revealing than seeing you step into the very things they believed you would never achieve. Nothing challenges a person's assumptions more than being confronted with the living truth of your progress. And now that you are moving forward, now that your growth is unfolding plainly, they cannot hide behind their former judgments. You did not have to correct them. Your progress did the correcting for you. So stand tall in your growth. Every step you take is rewriting the narrative they tried to place on you. Every victory is a testimony that their assumptions were misplaced. Every new level you reach is a reminder that your potential was never bound by their perspective. You are living proof that being underestimated is not a disadvantage. It is an opportunity to rise without the weight of expectations. And your rise has exposed the truth: they misjudged you entirely. Beloved chosen ones, 11thly, the rejection you faced was never about the impossibility of your words. It was about the incompatibility of your courage with their comfort. Your belief was larger than the boundaries they built around their own lives. The moment you spoke boldly about what you sensed coming, you triggered something inside them that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with the fears they had spent years trying to bury. They were not rejecting your vision because it was wrong. They were rejecting it because it shook the safety of the world they had built. Your confidence challenged the quiet compromises they made with their own potential. Your clarity exposed the places where they had chosen stagnation over growth. And instead of admitting that truth, it was easier for them to label your words as unrealistic, irrational, or premature. People cling to safety even when safety is the very thing holding them back. They create invisible borders and call those borders wisdom, responsibility, or practicality. But the real reason they stay inside those limits is fear disguised as logic. When you stepped outside of that circle and spoke from a place of conviction, you disrupted the balance they relied on to avoid considering their own calling. Your words were not simply statements, they were reflections. They held up a mirror that forced them to see the gap between who they were and who they could have been. And most people do not appreciate being confronted with their own unrealized potential. It is easier to deny your faith than to face their own lack of it. Your belief had weight. It had substance. It carried a tone of someone who had already felt the future in their spirit. That tone alone was enough to unsettle those who only know how to move when everything is certain and visible. They saw your boldness and realized silently that they had abandoned their own. They heard your declarations and recognized the echoes of dreams they once held but eventually surrendered when life became demanding. Instead of celebrating your courage, they rejected it because it reminded them of the courage they no longer exercised. They were not afraid of your mistake. They feared your accuracy. Because if you were right, if your words manifested, if your future unfolded exactly as you described, then it would reveal the truth they tried to suppress. That the safety they chose was not protection, but confinement. Your voice disturbed their stillness. You shook the ground beneath a foundation built on staying small. They found comfort in predictability, in staying where nothing demanded too much from them. But your determination pushed against that comfort, not intentionally, but naturally. Every time you spoke boldly, you unintentionally exposed the smallness of the cage they built for themselves. They did not want to confront the reality that they too were created for more, but chose to remain where effort was minimal and risk was non-existent. And so rather than admit that your belief awakened something uncomfortable inside them, they masked their discomfort with dismissal. Human beings will often reject anything that challenges the stories they tell themselves. They rejected your words because accepting them would require acknowledging how deeply they had settled. They would have to accept that faith demands discomfort, that progress demands risk, and that greatness is born in places where certainty does not exist. You were willing to take that risk. They were not, and your willingness made them feel exposed. You forced them without trying to see how long they had been standing still. Your words became reminders of the dreams they let die, the goals they abandoned, and the callings they ignored. It was not your fault that their reflection felt painful. Your belief also illuminated something they were not prepared to accept, that you had grown beyond the version of yourself they were comfortable managing. They preferred you uncertain, hesitant, modest in the way that kept them comfortable. They preferred you questioning your own worth because it allowed them to maintain the illusion of control or superiority. But the moment your faith expanded, the moment your voice carried strength, the moment you spoke from a higher sense of identity, their comfort was threatened. They saw that they could no longer predict you, no longer contain you, no longer keep you safely within the limits they imagined for you. Your belief broke the dynamic they had depended on. And the deeper truth is this: they were not afraid that your words would fall flat. They were afraid that your words would flourish. Because if you succeeded, if you truly rose, then every excuse they gave themselves for not rising would crumble. Your triumph would expose their unwillingness to move. Your growth would dismantle the stories they created to justify playing small. Your rise would reveal that the boundaries they claimed were unbreakable were in fact self-imposed. So rejecting your belief was their attempt to protect their comfort from your conviction. Your faith was not loud, but it was undeniable. It carried a gravity that made them uneasy. It reminded them of the discomfort they had avoided for too long. They clung to their safety while you stepped into purpose. They embraced familiarity while you embraced calling. They accepted limitation while you accepted destiny. And though they would never say it openly, your progress reveals the truth of their reactions. They did not mock you because you spoke too soon. They mocked you because you spoke from a place they had forgotten how to access. Your words became a dividing line between those who fight for their calling and those who run from it. And as your life begins to align with what you declared, they must face the fact that your faith was never the problem. Their fear was You were never the threat. Your growth was, you were not the one disturbing their peace. Their own unfulfilled potential was shaking inside them in response to your courage. So let them reject what they cannot understand. Let them resist what they do not want to face. Let them cling to safety if they must. Your faith was never meant to fit inside their comfort. It was meant to lead you into the future your soul has been ready for all along. Twelfthly, do you know speaking early does far more than reveal belief? It activates movement. When you speak from a place of genuine conviction, when the words rise from a depth inside you that is aligned with purpose, you are not making a casual statement. You are issuing an instruction. You are sending a signal into the unseen that begins rearranging the very structure of your reality. People often think change starts with action, but in truth, change begins with sound. The moment your voice breaks the silence with intention, the atmosphere takes notice. The universe, creation, destiny, call it what you will, begins shifting to accommodate the direction you declared. Your early words were not empty, they were catalytic. When you spoke, you were not trying to predict the future, you were beginning the process of shaping it. You released something that carried authority, something born from the alignment of your inner knowing, your spiritual timing, and your courage to declare what had not yet materialized. Those words initiated motion behind the scenes long before you saw anything change in front of you. Just because the shift was invisible did not mean it was inactive. The moment you spoke, things began to move. Doors that once seemed sealed began loosening. Relationships misaligned with your purpose started dissolving. Opportunities hidden from view began inching closer. Chains that held your progress hostage began to weaken. The declaration of your voice initiated all of that. This is why those early words felt so powerful even when nothing around you seemed different. Because your spirit could sense what your eyes could not yet see. Your words were the first domino in a long chain that would eventually lead to manifestation. You were applying pressure to the invisible world, and the invisible world was responding. You may not have realized it at the time, but you were stepping into the creative authority granted to every person willing to speak from truth rather than fear. The universe is not moved by doubt. It is not moved by hesitation. It is moved by certainty, and your words carried that certainty. People often misunderstand why speaking early matters. It matters because words are not passive. They do not just reflect reality, they direct it. When spoken from alignment, words become assignments. They become the blueprint that life begins to build around you. In the silence after your declaration, something begins assembling. It might be slow, it might be subtle, but it is precise, deliberate, and responsive to the intention behind your voice. And even though others mocked your statements, dismissed your confidence, or questioned your boldness, the universe did not. It took your words seriously. It started preparing the path you named. What looked like coincidence later was not coincidence at all. It was orchestration. Your words made room for the future to enter. Your statements signaled readiness. You were not just speaking of what might come, you were activating what must come. This is why hesitation dies the moment conviction is spoken. Because once the sound leaves your mouth, you cannot return to your former state. Something within you has already moved forward. Something around you begins shifting to meet it. Your early declarations also confronted stagnation. Before you spoke, parts of your life were static, unmoving, almost dormant. But the moment you named your direction, those dormant places were forced to awaken. Speaking early is like striking a match in the dark. It ignites movement. It disrupts inactivity. It pierces complacency. You were not waiting for life to change before you spoke. Your speaking started the change. And that shift was not symbolic. It was literal in the realm you could not see. Many people wait for proof before they declare anything. But waiting for proof is not faith, it is observation. Faith is when your words leap ahead of your circumstances and your circumstances have no choice but to follow. Faith speaks in the unseen and forces the seen world to adjust. That's exactly what happened when you spoke early. You set something in motion so powerful that even the areas of your life resisting growth began to move under the weight of your intention. Your words also created accountability within your own spirit. When you spoke of what was coming, your soul aligned more closely with the path ahead. You started instinctively making choices that fit the future you declared. The moment your mouth named a direction, your decisions, your energy, your actions began shifting to support it. That is the unseen power of declaration. It creates alignment inside you that your life cannot ignore. And when the inner world aligns, the outer world cannot remain unchanged. The universe responds to boldness faster than it responds to passivity. That is why your early statements, even the ones people laughed at, were taken seriously by the forces shaping your destiny. You didn't speak too soon. You spoke at the exact moment your future required initiation. You activated doors that needed time to open. You triggered opportunities that were being prepared for you. You called forward blessings that were waiting for confirmation that you were ready. And now, as things unfold, as your life begins to reflect the very words you once spoke into empty air, it becomes obvious that your declarations were never misguided. They were the spark that ignited a chain of divine, unseen structural shifts in your favor. They were the beginning of a sequence that only makes sense in hindsight. Your voice was the first step of your manifestation. So remember this, the world around you did not begin to change by accident. It began changing the moment you gave it a command. Your words were not simply sounds, they were signals. They were permission. They were activation. And whether others understood it or not, the universe understood you perfectly. Chosen ones. 13thly, you must understand one unmistakable truth about why they doubted you so aggressively. They had never seen anyone rise from where you stood. Their disbelief was not rooted in your incapacity. It was rooted in their lack of imagination. In their minds, people who come from backgrounds like yours stay where they started. People who face the setbacks you faced usually remain defined by those setbacks. People who have walked through the storms you survived rarely emerge as anything other than survivors. But you were never built to be typical. You were never meant to fit a predictable mold. You were designed to break patterns, break ceilings, and break the assumptions that history tried to place on you. And because that truth was invisible to the people around you, your rise seemed impossible to them. When you spoke early, when you said things that reached far beyond the environment you were living in, they could not comprehend it because their imagination was shaped by their experiences, not by your destiny. They were measuring you by the people they had seen, by the stories they had heard, by the limits they had internalized. They assumed that what had not been done could not be done. They assumed that because no one in your position had walked into greatness, greatness was unavailable to you. Their disbelief was a projection of their limits, not a reflection of yours. You challenged the boundaries of what they believed was possible. You disrupted the narrative they were comfortable with. They wanted you to stay predictable because predictability is easier to categorize. Predictability keeps things neat, controlled, and undemanding. But you did not come to live inside the margins of their expectations. You came to expand them. Your words did not scare them because they were wrong. They scared them because they shattered the quiet comfort of tradition, familiarity, and inherited limitation. You forced them to confront the fact that they had built their sense of reality on assumptions instead of possibility. Your background, your beginnings, your struggles, these were the very things that used to define you. But those same things were what prepared you, strengthened you, and shaped you for a path far greater than the one they imagined. You rose not in spite of your position, but because of it. You learned resilience in the shadows. You learned clarity in the silence. You learned persistence in the places where others gave up. And when you spoke boldly about your future, you were not speaking from fantasy. You were speaking from the strength earned through everything you endured. It is easy for people to believe in someone who comes from a line of success. It is easy for them to cheer on a person whose path resembles stories they have seen before. But when someone rises from unexpected ground, when someone steps out of a narrative that was supposed to confine them, it disturbs the comfort of tradition. They could not see you rising because they never believed your origin could produce the kind of future you declared. They doubted you because you did not fit the pattern. They underestimated you because you did not resemble the prototype. But that is exactly why you were chosen for this path. You were meant to be the exception that rewrites the rule. You were designed to break generational ceilings, to interrupt flawed expectations, to step into a future that contradicts the past. When you spoke about your destiny, you were speaking from a frequency higher than the frequency of the people who judged you. Your words were too expansive for their limited frameworks. Your vision was too evolved for the smallness they were accustomed to. And rather than stretch themselves to imagine the world you were describing, they found it easier to dismiss you. They laughed because they were listening with ears shaped by limitation. They dismissed you because they could not envision what you already knew in your spirit. But the moment you began rising, the moment your progress became visible, the moment your future began unfolding exactly as you declared, they were forced to confront an uncomfortable truth: you were never the one who was wrong. Their imagination failed them. Their judgment limited them. Their expectations betrayed them. And your rise revealed the cracks in their perspective. Your progress became a revelation. It showed that history does not dictate destiny. It showed that beginnings do not determine endings. It showed that the soil you were planted in does not define the height you can reach. You were never meant to be confined by statistics, patterns, or inherited narratives. You came into this world as a disruption to the cycle. Your rise is proof that the impossible becomes possible when a person refuses to accept the boundaries others place on them. And now that your life is moving in the direction you once declared, they must face the truth they avoided. They misjudged you because they judged you through the lens of their own limitations. They doubted you because they doubted themselves. They could not imagine you rising because they could not imagine themselves rising from similar places. Your courage became a reflection of their hesitation. Your potential became a reminder of their abandonment of potential. Your journey exposed the fact that their disbelief was never about you, it was about what your belief revealed in them. So stand firm in your rising. You are not just moving forward for yourself, you are breaking ground for every person who has ever been underestimated. You are proving that greatness can emerge from unexpected places. You are demonstrating that destiny has no respect for the limits people try to put on you. And every step you take is rewriting what they believed was possible. Beloved chosen ones, lastly, something essential about your journey, something that will bring clarity to every moment you ever felt misunderstood. You were never speaking too soon. They were simply understanding too late. The timing was never the problem. Your voice was never premature. Your conviction was never misplaced. The real issue was that your evolution happened long before they updated their idea of who you had become. You grew in silence, but they kept listening to you with ears tuned to your yesterday. You expanded in ways they could not track, and by the time you opened your mouth to speak your future, they were still processing an outdated version of your identity. What they called early was actually accurate. What they called unrealistic was simply unfamiliar. You were aligned with a future they had not yet learned how to imagine. Breakthrough is never late. Breakthrough arrives exactly on time for the person who has done the inner work to receive it. The only people who think it comes suddenly are those who never noticed the preparation. You lived through seasons of transformation they never witnessed. You endured moments of internal stretching that reshaped your perspective. You fought battles that deepened your clarity. And while they remained the same, you were evolving. While they stayed in their familiar patterns, you were shedding layers. While they stood still in the safety of predictability, you were becoming someone new. So naturally, when you spoke, it sounded early to them because they had not caught up with the truth that had already unfolded inside you. People misunderstand timing because they assume visible growth is the only growth that counts. But your transformation happened below the surface long before it rose into view. You were being prepared inwardly for a future your environment was not yet ready to acknowledge. And when you finally expressed what you knew, when you finally declared what you sensed, when you finally articulated the direction your spirit had already taken, they perceived it as premature simply because they were late to realize who you had become. They were responding to a version of you that no longer existed. Your evolution outpaced their expectations. Your growth exceeded their imagination. Your breakthrough arrived right on schedule, but they were not watching closely enough to see the signs. They mistook your clarity for confusion, your certainty for arrogance, your courage for recklessness. But the truth is that they were not equipped to understand you at the speed you were transforming. They were operating on delay while you were operating on revelation. They were standing in the past while you were stepping into the future. And that disconnect created the illusion that you were speaking ahead of time, when in reality you were simply speaking from the identity you had already grown into. Consider how many times great change throughout history has been misunderstood because people were slow to perceive what was unfolding. The visionary is always labeled ahead of their time, not because their insight is wrong, but because the world has not adjusted quickly enough. You were not ahead. They were behind. You were not overly ambitious. They were overly attached to what they thought they knew about you. Every time they questioned your timing, every time they doubted your words, every time they dismissed your declarations, they were revealing the lag in their own understanding. You had already evolved to a higher level of awareness. You had already felt the alignment shift inside you. You had already recognized the calling intensify. You had already stepped into a mindset that was preparing you for the next season. They were the ones who had not updated their perception. They were the ones who stayed stuck in who you used to be. They were the ones who refused to see what God was shaping in you long before the evidence appeared. Their delay created the illusion that you moved early, but your timing was perfect. What looked like sudden breakthrough to them was actually breakthrough catching up to the words you spoke. Everything is on schedule when your spirit is ahead. Destiny arrives in its appointed moment, but the understanding of those watching often arrives late. They did not believe you because they could not perceive the transformation that preceded your declaration. They did not see the depth of your internal evolution. They did not recognize how much you had grown. They assumed nothing had changed simply because nothing visible had shifted yet. But you knew better. You felt the shift. You sensed the timing. You understood that speaking your truth was not premature, it was obedient. Your breakthrough did not arrive out of nowhere. It arrived after a long journey of preparation, but they did not witness that journey. They did not see your discipline, your battles, your nights of doubt, your moments of clarity, your spiritual alignment. They saw the manifestation, but not the process. And because manifestation is always more visible than preparation, they assume the blessing came quickly. But quick is a lie. Quick is a misunderstanding. Quick is the perspective of someone who did not pay attention. You were not speaking ahead of time. You were speaking from the truth of who you had already become. The gap between your words and your reality was not a sign of premature speech. It was a sign of transformation unfolding exactly as it should. The only people who misinterpreted your timing were the ones who refused to update their understanding of you. They clung to an outdated version while you stepped boldly into your new one. Your evolution was faster than their perception. Your breakthrough was faster than their acceptance. Your growth was faster than their awareness. And that is why they misunderstood your timing. But misunderstanding does not diminish truth. Their delay does not diminish your destiny. Their slowness does not diminish your calling. So stand firm knowing this: you did not speak too early. You spoke exactly when you were supposed to. They just learned the truth too late. Your evolution outpaced their expectations, and that is not your burden to carry. You owe no apology for growing faster than they were ready to understand. The timing of your voice was perfect because the timing of your destiny is perfect. And now, as the evidence unfolds, as the manifestations appear, as the reality catches up to the words you once declared, they will finally see what you knew all along. Breakthrough was never late. Their understanding was. My dear friends, At the heart of everything you have walked through, everything you have spoken, everything people doubted or dismissed, lies a truth far deeper than anyone around you ever understood. And that truth is this: early words are not illusions. They are not recklessness. They are not fantasies spoken out of desperation. Early words are evidence of inner maturity, signs that your spirit has stepped into alignment long before your circumstances have had time to rearrange themselves. The world teaches us to speak only when we see results, to declare only what is already visible, to follow the sequence of proof before proclamation. But the Spirit does not operate that way. The Spirit knows before the body sees. The Spirit recognizes before the mind comprehends. The Spirit speaks from a place that is already standing in the future, even while your feet remain in the present. When you opened your mouth and declared your direction, you were not acting out of hope, you were acting out of memory. Your words were the echo of a truth already established inside you. You did not speak early. You spoke from awareness. You spoke from growth. You spoke from inner clarity that had been forming quietly for years while no one else paid attention. What others called premature was actually a reflection of the spiritual maturity you had developed through every hardship, every disappointment, every night of reflection, every season of hidden work. They did not understand your words because they had not lived your process. They could not trace your journey, so they misjudged your declaration. But every time you spoke boldly, you were revealing just how deeply you had evolved. You were showing that you no longer needed external validation to confirm what your soul already knew. You were showing that you had learned to trust the whispers God placed inside you more than the noise people placed around you. The people who doubted you, the ones who whispered, the ones who laughed, the ones who shook their heads, did not expose your weakness, they exposed their limits. Their skepticism revealed more about them than it ever did about you. They doubted because they lived within the confines of what they had seen, what they had experienced, what they could comprehend. They had never encountered someone who believed beyond the visible. They had never stood next to someone whose spirit moved ahead of the calendar, ahead of the timeline, ahead of the evidence. They could not understand the depth of your conviction because they had silenced their own years ago. They could not recognize the strength of your belief because their belief had been buried under layers of fear, disappointment, and familiarity. Every doubt they expressed was a mirror reflecting their constraints. Their inability to imagine your rise was a reflection of their inability to imagine their own. They were not fighting your future, they were fighting the uncomfortable truth that your courage revealed about their complacency. And as your words begin to manifest, as the reality around you starts shifting, to match the declarations you once made, they are confronted with a truth they tried to avoid. You were never unrealistic. They were simply unprepared for the magnitude of your transformation. Everything you spoke is materializing for one reason: your spirit has been ahead of your reality this entire time. Destiny does not start with visible change. It starts with internal alignment. Before doors open in the physical world, they open in the spiritual one. Before opportunities present themselves outwardly, readiness forms inwardly. And long before you see breakthrough with your eyes, your spirit senses it, adjusts to it, and begins speaking from it. You were not guessing. You were not imagining. You were not pretending. Your words were the natural outflow of an identity that had already expanded. You were speaking from the person you had become, not the person the world still believed you were. This is why your declarations felt so natural to you, even when they sounded strange to others. Your entire being had adjusted to the truth of your calling. You had already stepped into a higher mindset, a sharper awareness, a deeper confidence. Your life had not yet caught up, but your spirit was already living in the place you were destined to reach. And now, as reality begins to shift, as the path unfolds, as the blessings align, it becomes clear that your spirit knew long before your environment did. The future was not random. The breakthrough was not sudden. The manifestation was not unexpected. Everything happening now was set in motion the moment your inner maturity met your spoken truth. This is the power of early words. They do not just announce the future, they activate it. They initiate the movement that begins aligning every necessary piece. They awaken courage within you and discomfort within others. They move mountains internally long before the earth begins to shake externally. Speaking early is not a flaw. It is a mark of spiritual readiness. It means your awareness matured faster than your surroundings. It means you were built to perceive what others could not yet see. And it means that your destiny required you to speak from a place of faith rather than from a place of proof. Your life is now catching up to the version of you that has been waiting in your spirit all along. The world is now witnessing what heaven recognized years ago. Those who doubted are watching the truth unfold. Those who labeled you unrealistic are witnessing the accuracy of your alignment. Those who whispered against you are hearing the echoes of their own limitation collapse in real time. And those who once looked at you through the lens of your past are realizing that your future was never dependent on their understanding. You spoke early because you were called early. You believed early because you were shaped early. You declared early because your destiny was stirring long before the evidence arrived. And now that the manifestation is here, the world cannot deny what your spirit has known all along. So, as this message comes to a close, let this final truth settle deeply into your being. Your voice is powerful. Your alignment is real. Your growth is undeniable. And your journey is proof that when the spirit moves first, reality must eventually follow. If this message has stirred something inside you, if it has reminded you of who you truly are and who you are becoming, then do not walk away quietly. Share it, speak it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next, because your journey is still unfolding and heaven is not finished speaking to you.